If you haven't tried to try this, please pause and go back and try it. If you did try it, then here's the correct answer. So what I did is I started by multiplying, getting common denominators, which would be 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. So the first fraction would be cosecant of x times 1 minus secant of x over 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. And then the second fraction we'd multiply by 1 plus secant x. So we get cosecant of x times 1 plus secant x over 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. Then if we go through on the top, we can multiply everything out. So I can distribute the cosecant, and I get cosecant of x minus cosecant x secant x. Again, and I got that from multiplying cosecant x by 1, and then cosecant x times negative secant x, all over 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. And then if I do the same thing on the other fraction, distribute that cosecant x, I get cosecant x plus cosecant x secant x. Again, that came from cosecant times 1 and cosecant times secant. And this is all over 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. Then I can go ahead and combine my fractions together since I have common denominators. So I have cosecant x plus another cosecant x will give me 2 cosecant x. And then I have a negative cosecant x secant x and a positive cosecant x secant x. Those two will cancel out. And then in the denominator, I have my 1 plus secant x times 1 minus secant x. And one thing you can note here is that this is a difference of squares. So if I multiply that all out, and again, you can multiply it out on your own off to the side if you need to, this is just 1 minus secant squared x. Again, and that's multiplying these two together. Then from here, 1 minus secant squared x, you should be thinking about your Pythagorean identities. So if we look at the one with the secant x in it, it's tangent squared x plus 1 equals secant squared x. And so to get 1 minus secant squared x, I would have to subtract the secant squared x over to this side, which means I'd have to take and subtract the tangent squared over to the other side. So 1 minus secant squared x is equal to negative tangent squared x. So I can replace the bottom here by negative tangent squared. So we get 2 cosecant x over negative tangent squared x. And then at this point I want to see, can I get anything, the cosecant to change to tangent or the tangent to change to cosecant? And you can go and look at that box that you have of all your properties, and then you can realize that no, there's nothing you can really do to change that. So then what we can do is then start changing things in terms of sines and cosines. So 2 cosecant x is the same thing as 2 over the sine of x, because the reciprocal of cosecant is sine. And since I have a fraction, I'm going to divide like this instead of using another fraction bar. Negative tangent squared is the same thing as negative sine squared x over cosine squared x. And then we can use our rules of division. We keep the first fraction the same. Division changes to multiplication, and we take the reciprocal of our second fraction. So we get cosine squared x over negative sine squared x. And actually, I'm going to leave that negative on the top. It just makes things a little bit easier. And then I can multiply these two fractions together, and I get negative 2 cosine squared x over sine to the third x. And if I look at these, there's not much that I can do. There's nothing to simplify. So I might break it back down again so I can get something similar to what I just had to find the trig functions that I need. So if I look at a cosine squared over a sine squared is going to be a tangent squared. So I'm going to go back and take out a cosine squared x and a sine squared x and multiply by whatever I have left over. So on the top it would be a negative 2. The bottom I would still have a sine x. And then if I change it back to my trig functions, cosine squared over sine squared is the same as cotangent squared. And then I have my negative 2. And if I bring the sine x up as that reciprocal, that's going to be the cosecant of x. And so bringing my number in front, I get negative 2 cotangent squared x times cosecant of x. If you have any questions, let me know.